Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment, and this is session 55. Does it seem like we've been in it that long?
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't to me. Barbara says no. I like Barbara. Okay, I'm going with Barbara. All right. Today is a milestone, however, because today we're going to finish up the first section of your sonship establishment. That is the part contained in Romans chapter 8, verses 16 to 25. And that is the first section of your sonship establishment. So when you come back here next Sunday, we'll be starting on that second section. Yes, in verses, it's the shortest of the sections, but it's going to change topics for us. Going to take us in a completely different direction and do something very different to add to your sonship establishment. So I'm looking forward to that. Today at the end, because this is going to be the end of this first section, I am going to give you a chance to ask any questions that you have about it. If there's something that you're not clear on, be glad to make all of that comment that needs to be made about making sure that we all have everything in place, because you'll need to, because we're moving on in the next session. All right. And by the way, I'm going to say it to you again. I cannot overemphasize to you the importance of when you're at home during the week of spending time looking at these verses. You're going to have to set aside some time for them to do the work in you that they're supposed to do. Just looking at them on Sunday is not going to get that done. There'll be some things that you'll see that will just impact you in a moment. But other things happen through a process of time, and that's the way most of it takes place. Now today, in order to make sure that we cover everything that we need to cover in this first section, I'm going to be saying some things several times. You'll hear it repeated. Something I said at the beginning might get repeated again in the middle or toward the end. And that's just because I want to make sure that you hear it. And it's not like you'll never look at the notes again, but I'm just trying to make sure that this is a little bit of a scary spot for me, because we're fixing to move on now after today from this first part of your sonship establishment, and I don't want there to be any gaps in your thinking. All right, now, with all of that said, let's take a look at the verse that we have under consideration, Romans chapter 8, verse 23. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. And if you'll recall, last time we talked about there were two types of groaning that was going on. One in verse 22 and one in verse 23. The one in verse 22 is the one the creature was doing, and it was groaning. Let's just do it like this. It was groaning in pain. Groaning and travailing in pain. And that groaning, remember we defined that, is that involuntary expression of physical or mental anguish or pain. But now the groaning that takes place in verse 23 is not for the earth and the creature, it's for us as sons. And the groaning that we're doing is our groan, and we saw this defined in the Scripture, is the earnest desire to go to work with our Heavenly Father. Now, there's a lot of parts to that, so you can talk about any of those parts you want to. You can say that earnest desire is for me to get up there and deliver the creature. That's perfectly fine. You could say, my earnest desire is to get up there and go to work in my Father's business. You're talking about the same thing. You could talk about, I want to deliver the creature from vanity or from the bondage of corruption. That's fine, because all of that is part of your Father's business. So it doesn't matter to me how you talk about that. The important thing to understand is that You are not, and that thing that you're actually groaning for, that groan is not a groaning in pain, but it's that earnest desire for your redeemed body. Because until you get that redeemed body, you're not going anywhere. Until you get that redeemed body, you're not going to labor with your Father up there. You're not going to help the creature. You're not going to get involved in his business. So no matter how you want to phrase that, you have to have this redeemed body. And that's what you're groaning for. Now, we covered that in that last session. And I want to make a comment about it. Because when we talked about this earnest desire to want to get up there and get to work, some of you are having a little bit of a mental snag here, because I know what you're thinking. In fact, some things were said that let me know this is what was going on with that. You're saying, yeah, I do want to get up there and do this. It's going to be a great day, but I've got to get my sonship education before I do that. Yes? And so you might be thinking, well, am I really groaning with that earnest desire if really I'm not in a hurry to do that today because I know I need this sonship education? So let me kind of solve that dilemma for you a little bit. The earnest desire is not, I don't care what I know, just let me up there right now. That's not what the earnest desire is about. It's not compared to getting your education. In other words, to see if this groan is really taking place in you is not to say to yourself, do I want to go right now today? Or do I want to wait till I get my education? And if I want to wait, then obviously I'm not earnestly desiring it. That's not the way to look at it. Because obviously you have to have the education before you can do any good for the creature, right? So I'm going to look, it's a little bit like when I was in Bible college. When you're in Bible college and you've been licensed into the ministry and you're a preacher boy, you know what you really want to do? You can't wait till the day comes that you get into a church and you go to work. And I went to school with a bunch of other preacher boys. And we would talk all the time about what we wanted to do when we got a church and, you know, and all that kind of business. And every day when I went to class, I was thinking, I can't wait till the day I'm doing this. But because I was young and immature, I didn't value the education I was getting and how it was going to help me do some things once I got into ministry. I was just so anxious to get into ministry. Now, I guess if someone had had a conversation with me about it, I would have admitted, yes, I don't know everything and there's some things I need to learn, but I would have probably countered with, but you know what, I wouldn't go right in as a senior pastor. I'd work on staff and I'd let the guy that's been doing it for years teach me. You know, I would have done it that way. I just wanted to get out there and get with it. But and actually, if you had talked to me about that, if someone had said, look, I'm just waiting until I get my education, I would have said then, you don't want it very bad. That's what I would have said. But what I didn't understand is the patient waiting to get prepared and the earnest desire to go do it are supposed to go hand in hand. Those are not the two things that are at odds with each other. Are you following what I'm saying so far? And so the measure is not the way to know, because remember I told you this is a checkpoint for you. The way to know if this is really working in you is not to say, do I want to go so bad and get my redeemed body and get up there and go to work with my Father that I don't care about my education? You're making the wrong comparison here. It's not as opposed to that. Here is the right comparison because there is a way to do that. The comparison is, look, are you under the bondage of corruption just like the creature? You are. Are you experience, will you, or could you, I could say, could you experience the sufferings of this present time? Of course. If your earnest desire is to get that redeemed body so you can get out of the sufferings, now you know that's not working in you. That's the comparison. Why do you want that redeemed body? That's the comparison. It's not, do I want it more than my education? Any mature adult understands that before you go do a job, you need to know how to do that job. That's just a no-brainer. So that's not how you measure it. You understand? It's not that. The measure is, why do I want this redeemed body? If it's like the creature, if it's because I wake up in pain every day and I'm sick and tired of hurting and I'm just ready to get my redeemed body, this passage has not done the work in you it was designed to do. This passage is designed for you to desire that redeemed body for what you're going to go do, not for what you're going to get out of. Did everybody get? That's the comparison. And so you have to say to yourself, why do I really want? And by the way, I think the people sitting in this room, I don't think you're in here because you don't want to go labor with your father in his business. I mean, if you're still here and that's not your intention, you need help. Because you're enduring a whole lot for nothing. This thing is all pointed somewhere. Now, so what we do is, yes, we want that redeemed body so we can get up there and go to work. And by the way, will that be a glorious day when we get up there? Yes, it will. And so if you're looking forward to that day, great. And if you're saying, and I can't wait to get my redeemed body so I can go do that, that is the measure of the effectual working of this passage in you. That's what it's meant to produce. But when someone said, and by the way, in the old days, folks knew about the rapture, and they knew that they were going to get a new body. And you know what? The thing that was always emphasized about that body is no more pain and no more, hitches in your get along and all that kind of business, and that will be true. That will be true. And I'm not saying that won't be enjoyable. It will be. That a body that will never again be sick, never again get hurt, never again grow old, not experience any of the bondage of corruption, never experience any of the sufferings. I'm not saying you won't enjoy that body. You will. But the motivation for getting that body isn't for you to get out of that other. That motivation is for you to get up there and do something for your Father's business in the creature. That's what this passage is supposed to be. And that's the measure. Now, only you can answer that question. If you're saying to yourself, because if that's really what you're after, I just can't wait till I quit hurting, then you know what all you're doing is? Marking time until the day you die. That is not what this passage is supposed to produce. Just tough it out till you keel over dead. Glory to God, isn't He good? This is producing something way better than that. Okay, so the effectual working of this passage right here is very measurable. You can say to yourself, how do I know that this thing really is doing what it's supposed to do? It's by asking yourself the question, am I looking forward to getting my redeemed body and getting up there to go to work with my Father? That is, by the way, what all this is about. This is the purpose that He has in mind. And so if that's what you're after, then you know that the effectual, I'm just going to abbreviate it here, the effectual working of this passage is taking place. Now, I want to tell you something else about that. The longer you go in sonship, the greater that groan for that redeemed body will be. Your desire is going to increase. There are things that you understand now about sonship that when I first talked about it, however you thought about it, well, I'll use me for example. That first came to light for me, I thought that was just the greatest thing ever, but I want to tell you what, it means more to me today than it did then because my understanding of it has deepened. I really understand aspects of this then I didn't even know existed back then. And so now, there's depth to that, that comes with that understanding. And so I'm not saying, have you got the deepest, most earnest desire that you could ever have that could never be improved upon? You can't have that yet. But as you go through the curriculum, you're going to deepen all of that. So however great it is right now, it's going to get more. And so I want to make that point to you. The first job, you remember back when we talked about that, is that when you were told that you were sons, and then you were introduced to the Spirit in a particular function. He was called the Spirit of adoption. Remember that? He had a job to do. Once you're made aware that you're a son, and He is now the Spirit that you got the day you received Jesus Christ as your Savior, He now is going to begin to do a job in you as the Spirit of adoption. It's not the very first thing He does. Things got done for you by Him the day you got saved. But as the Spirit of adoption in that role, the very first thing He does is contained in these verses right here. And He's going to take these verses and produce that godly desire in you to get going in your Father's business. And if you have that, that means that what the Spirit is doing in you by that living Word is producing exactly what it is supposed to produce. And this verse that we're looking at is actually going to divide up between some people. I'm going to come back and talk about this, but look at this verse. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption. If you read that the way it's supposed to be read, if you don't have the first fruits of the Spirit, guess what? You won't be groaning for the adoption. The only people that are groaning for the adoption, the redemption of their body, are the people who have the first fruits of the Spirit. Remember last time we talked about what are first fruits? It's the first thing produced. So the very first job of the Spirit of adoption is to produce something in you. And if He's produced that godly desire to get that glorified body and get up there and go to work, guess what? You know you have the first fruits of the Spirit. Yes? And that's indicated because you really are groaning to get up there and get to work. But if you don't have the first fruits of the Spirit, the rest of that verse won't be true for you either. So for years, I read that verse having really no idea what that was talking about, but that's actually drawing a line to tell you how to know which side of that line you're on. How to know if the Spirit has done that work in you. Because really, that's a spiritual work. There's no tangible, physical, material, visible way for you to see that. So if you're saying, do I have the first fruits of the Spirit? Well, if these verses have produced that earnest desire to get that glorified body, to get up there and deliver the creature and go to work with your Father and be about His business and get involved with all of that as a son and be put in those positions in the heavenly places and carry that thing out, if that's really your earnest desire, if that's really what you're headed toward, then guess what? You have the first fruits of the Spirit, because that's what that was intended to produce. If you don't have it, then you miss something. And you're going to have to go back and work through that passage again. I know, not good news. But I'm just saying, that's the measure of it, and that's how we know. All right, now, verse 24. For we are saved by hope. Now, that saved is not talking about saved from the debt and penalty of your sin. That's the old systematic theology, remember, fell into the trap every time a word was used, they defined it the same way every time. So when you see saved, they always thought about being saved from sin. But this is not in your justification, this is in your sanctification. And in the context here, he's not talking about being saved, he's talking to people who are already saved. And in that context, he says this, for we are, it would be kind of ridiculous, wouldn't it? Lost people having the first fruits of the Spirit and groaning for the redemption of their body, and they're not even, I mean, give me a break. I mean, how ridiculous would that be? But we are saved by hope, and when he's talking about saved in this context, take it all the way back. Remember, this is 24, so just in this whole context here, he's talking about making something a reality for you. He's talking about something that needs to happen that you have to have. And here it is. It's sitting back in verse 18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. If this thing does its work, and it really does effectually work to produce this earnest desire to get your glorified body and go to work. Now watch how this puts together. This is marvelous how this puts together. If this doctrine, instead of just hammering you on that, in verse 19, he immediately changes over. Remember, he wants you to be able to reckon this. Oh, I'm confusing you. Let me start over. Verse 18. There's something you've got to be able to reckon. And that is that the sufferings that you're going to go through in your life are going to be nothing compared to what's waiting for you. But in order to get that done, he's going to come back, and he starts in verse 19 telling you about the earnest expectation of the creature is waiting for the day you are manifested as sons. And then in verse 20, he tells you about the first part of the predicament the creature is in. It was made subject to vanity. And we talked about what that was. And then in verse 21, he came along and he talked about something else that the creature was under, and that was the bondage of corruption. And then he came along in 22 and he talked about not just the creature, but the whole creation, the heaven and the earth, groaning and travailing in pain together until now. And then he talks about, remember, in that same verse, he not only talks about the kind of groaning they're doing, but he talks about the kind of groaning we're doing, or we're supposed to do. If we have the first fruits of the Spirit, we're going to be, the creature's groaning, I need to be delivered. And we're groaning, I want to get up there and deliver you. That's the difference with that. Now that's in verse 22. And then you come along to verse 23, which is the verse we were just looking at. Sorry. And it says, we're groaning for this thing. So that's where That's where that, I really put that up ahead of a verse I shouldn't have. The whole creation in verse 22 groaneth and travaileth in pain. Verse 23, here's our groaning, that we're groaning for the redemption of our body to get up there and solve all of that. And then you get to verse 24, and he talks about, now this is where he starts to make the application. He's given you all this doctrine sitting from here to here. And now he's going to make an application so you can do verse 18. So you can reckon that. So how does he do that? 23 is part of that, and 24 and 25, they're all going to make an application of the doctrine for you. And when they do, here's what this does. This doctrine that you've been given is going to produce a hope. And that hope is what is so great that it's going to make that verse a living reality for you. That's how that happens. Did I lose you in that process? I started out and I thought it was pretty basic, and I got to the end and I thought, is everybody still with me? And I turned around and looked, and are you seeing how this works? In other words, the doctrine contained in this, if that works right in you, you're really wanting this glorified body so you can go to work. That is your hope. Look at that first phrase. For we are saved by hope. Now, what are you saved from? Because now the thing has come back to you. This was about you. So was verse 17 and verse 16. That was all about you. But then he turned to the creature, the whole creation, and then, this is really where the application starts, he comes back to you and he tells you how to measure if this thing is working in you, and then he tells you you are saved by hope. And you know what you're going to be saved from? Remember, this is the thing it's trying to point you to. It is that hope is going to save you from being overcome by the sufferings of this present time. Because I'm going to tell you now, plenty of people in the world have been absolutely overwhelmed by the sufferings of this present time. And they have given up. They have sunk into a depression, and they don't want to, but they don't know how to handle it. And unfortunately, and people's constitutions are different. But I have to tell you this, that if you don't have this doctrine working in you, there may well come events into your life one day that is just going to be too much for you to handle. And it's going to sink you into a depression or give you anxiety, or people have mental breakdowns. They have all kinds of things they get under stress. All kinds of things happen. Suicide is the number 2 killer for folks between the ages of 18 and 26 in this country. And do you know why? They are overwhelmed with the circumstances of life. It all piles in. I got a college education and I can't get a job. I'm broke. I don't have anywhere to live. All of my friends hate me. Everything goes wrong at one time. And every little thing that happens adds to the burden. Here's what this hope does. This hope is the thing that saves you from the effects of the suffering of this present time and the bondage of corruption that you are under. Karen? Yeah, you are. Yeah, in fact, she's pulling something out of Romans 12 here about renewing your mind. Paul's going to pick that thing up over there, and he's going to talk about, by the renewing of your mind. And remember, and we read verses ahead that talked about, though the outward man perish, the inward man is renewed day by day. You know what does that? It's the hope. It's the hope. So what he's really doing for you here is he's building a doctrine to make an application to say, This whole thing is geared for you to earnestly desire this glorified body, not to get out from under the sufferings, but to produce a hope that allows you to patiently endure the sufferings. So that, and you know what? You hope nothing terrible comes your way, but if it does, and God doesn't prescribe it, but if it does, you have something that will save you from being destroyed by those things. Is everybody with me now on this? For we are saved by hope. It is the same hope He gave the creature. The creature knows it's waiting on you. And it knows when. The day you're manifested as sons. And you know what? That makes it easier for the creature. Look, I was talking to somebody on the phone about this the other day, and they were calling me up and they were asking me a question, and I said, all right, this is a lousy illustration, but this will serve the purpose. 3 of us are going to go spelunking. You know what that is? Into caves. One of us is going to stay outside the cave while the other 2 go in. That would be me. Getting stuck in a small crawl space is not my idea of fun. Especially with bats and scorpions, and never mind. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced I'm the guy on the outside of the cave. I'm sitting in the air-conditioned truck, sipping a sweet tea from Sonic. All right. But I said, let's suppose that you and I go in the cave and our buddy stays outside the cave, and here's the understanding we have. You guys are going to have to come back out of that cave in 2 hours. Because if you're not out in 2 hours, then I'm coming in to find what's wrong. And you know what that means? That when we're going through there, we don't want anything to happen, but suppose that my clumsy buddy hits a rock with his foot, and there's a small cave-in behind us, and now we're blocked off from getting out. If you have this arrangement, and we've been in there for an hour and 45 minutes, do you panic and go, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Oh, because that's when you slap them and go, shut up. Because in 15 minutes, somebody's coming. Just sit down and be quiet so I don't have to kill you and blame it on the cave-in. You have a sure hope then, don't you? Right? So is there any reason to wring your hands and go, oh, right, murmuring and complaining. Right, I don't look at my buddy and go, it's all over. It's not over. They're coming. All right, now listen, that is a bad illustration because it doesn't quite carry the tenderness with it that it needs to carry. But here's my point. You realize there is nothing happening to you here on this earth that when you get the glory is not going to get undone. You say, what if you injure your back? I'm getting a new body. What if I get diagnosed with cancer? I'm getting a new body that will never get sick. You lost your dad. I'm getting him back. I may have to wait longer than 15 minutes. But you know what I know? That day is coming. People hurt your feelings. This is all going to get undone at the end. Are you following what I'm saying? That's what the spelunking thing is a poor illustration because it all happens immediately. But for this, listen, you understand, even if under the sufferings of the policy of evil, if Satan were to just take you and just thrash you to pieces and and just stomp you to smithereens and light the remnants on fire and scatter the ashes across the galaxy, it won't matter, because on that day, guess what? That whole body's coming back together. Anything he can do to you is going to be undone. So there's no, but there's something that you're getting in exchange for that. But I guess the thing I want to say is, there is no reason that this hope that gets built into you is not sufficient to carry you through, because it is sufficient to carry you through. And that's what's being built into you here. So, there's two aspects of this. Where am I? What do I got left? Okay. There's two aspects of this. I'm going to do the first one in this session and the second one in the second session. There's two aspects to this hope that makes this work. And they're both important. And you need to know them. And you need to be able to remember what they are, because these are the things that are going to be in your thinking when these times come. This is what you're going to need to anchor onto. So here it is. There is a particular way in which you are supposed to think about the sufferings. And by the way, the sufferings are a little different from the bondage of corruption. The bondage of corruption is just the things that happen because, you're just not, this body's not going to last forever. Okay? My hair fell out. I need glasses to read stuff up close or small print. It just doesn't operate. Part of the bondage of corruption. The sufferings of this present time is when some guy runs a stop sign and broadsides me, and now my neck is wrenched. They're close, but you understand. Okay, there is the first aspect of viewing both of those is to understand something about the glory. And I want you to look at verse 18. Sorry. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory. That's the way he phrases that. Now, I want to talk to you about the glory aspect of this. That statement says, whatever you're suffering, by the way, this thing cost Paul his life at the end. It was unto death. He was killed under the policy of evil. That suffering that may go on in your life, no matter what it is or where it comes from, the day you get the glory, listen, I promise you this is true. You'll not only look at that and say, wow, that was nothing compared to this, you won't even remember what you went through. That's how much greater it is. The Bible says it won't come into mind or even be remembered anymore. Now, while you're going through it, it seems like a horribly big deal. But when you get the glory, all of that is going to be wiped out. Now, when Paul says, for I reckon, you know what the word reckon means. It doesn't just mean count it to be true, but it is so true that it is now the basis of your actions. Your conduct is now based on that truth. Because there's a lot of things we know are true, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to adjust our behavior to accommodate it. But this reckoning means, Paul said, this is so true that now when I encounter sufferings, I'm actually looking at them in that light. that they're going to be so dwarfed by the glory that they're not going to mean anything. So that's the way I'm going to look at them. And that's the way he did. So I want to take you to a passage in Corinthians. Now, yes, I know it's Corinthians, but remember, all Paul's doing in Corinthians is bringing them back to Romans doctrine, something they should have gotten there. And I want to show you, because Paul is absolutely convinced. I really wish the Apostle Paul could stand behind this pulpit for 10 minutes. I'd give him that long. And as a fully educated son, I would give him 10 minutes in the pulpit. Okay. And let him say to you, I am absolutely convinced beyond any shadow of a doubt, and a lot of things have happened to me, but that is as true as it gets. Because he would. And here's what he says to the Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 4:17. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us. What does it work for you, Paul? A far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. He's bringing them right back to what was said in verse 18 of Romans 8, where he says, the sufferings are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. So when he says to them, those light afflictions are producing something. They're producing a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. And knowing about that glory is part of your hope. It's what sustains you. You're in the cave and it's caved in, but what you know is that's already been accounted for and it's going to get fixed. So and by the way, that light affliction, have you ever looked at the list in the Scripture of the things that happened to Paul? We've gone over those. You can't imagine the stuff that he's gone through. I'm looking at the stuff recorded in the Scripture and I'm thinking, what did he not write about? This is the stuff he's had going. How can he's not just being funny with it. He's calling it a light affliction because he realizes it's incomparable to the glory. So at the end of it all, what he's going through, he says, this is light. You say, it killed you. He's saying, yeah, and that's light. Because that's the worst you can do. That's the worst you can do. But for a moment, hey, Paul is a young man, comes to the Lord, and he endures these things for the rest of his life, and he calls it, but for a moment. But for a moment. He's just looking at all of that as it compares out to the eternal weight of glory. Yes, things that happen to us are bad when they happen, but God says, I'm going to turn them all around for good. They're going to produce something that's going to make all of that other go away. Now, Paul's whole attitude was based on that verse right there. And that's where your attitude has to be based. What these verses have got to do is make it so you are as sure of what's written in verse 18 as the Apostle Paul was. So that you're able to say, now, by the way, when Paul says he hungered and thirsted and was naked and cold and all of those, you know what that means? He really felt like what it was to not have something to eat. He really felt what it was like to be exposed to the elements. He really experienced that. I mean, this is not God magically shielding him. He's in the cold, but, Paul feels like he's on the beach in Maui. That's not how that worked. He felt every bit of it just like you and I would. Everything that affects us, it affected him. He went through it. But he was able to patiently endure it because he had the hope. And that hope made that a reality. So, let's go back to me and my buddy at the cave-in. We're not giving up. Because we know there's a day coming when all of that changes. Actually, there's a time coming when all that changes. Okay, in the 12 seconds I have left, I guess what I need to do is I need to save this. I need to save this because, and we'll do this after the break. The hope, folks, doesn't make it painless. It makes it endurable. That's the deal. Because I promise you, the sufferings hurt. Don't let anybody tell you that they don't. They do. But they're endurable. And they're endurable not because we have a stiff upper lip. They're endurable because something is getting produced in us that produces a hope, and that hope is going to take you through everything. Look, I have a sure confidence of what my eternity holds. I don't have any doubt about it. So I don't worry about it, and I don't get anxious about it. No matter what happens, I know where I'm going, know where I'm bound for. Like to finish up this education? Yep, sure would. Planning on doing it. But here's the thing you need to know. If something happens to me, I know where I am, know where I'm going to be. And that's going to be okay. There's not any problem with that. Till one of y'all's bossing me around in eternity. Then we have a problem. But, okay. So I'm going to try to finish this education. But there's something else I want to show you here in Corinthians when we come back from the break. That when he talks to them about this light affliction is producing an eternal weight of glory, you do understand that is dependent upon your right response to the suffering. If you're groaning about going through it, that is not the right response. You're enduring that while waiting for this to get done. Will all of that stop for you then? Yeah, but that can't be your motivation. The motivation has to be, I've got a work to do and I'm going to get involved in it. Now I'm going to show you something wonderful when you come back from the break. This is going to be